on handheld, and you should hear some chatter from the
All set? Good afternoon. We've had a few items occur since we last met. First, I'd like to address the continuing Republican assault on a woman's freedom of choice in the state of Washington. The ruling out of Texas a few days ago, I think, showed that our decision to act with foresight to acquire mifepristone was clearly the right decision. And I'm glad we now have this pharmaceutical safe product that's been used safely and effectively for 20 years is available to the women of the state of Washington. I think substantiating the outrageous character of that Texas decision was a statement by the American Medical Association, who said this about the ruling, quote, "It flies in the face of science and evidence." And we follow science and evidence in the state of Washington. This is an attack on freedom, a freedom of a woman to make her own personal decision. It is both an insult to science and an insult to the women of the state of Washington who have to be protected from this intrusion. This ruling by the appointed judge was entirely predictable, but it is an unprecedented expansion on the assault on women's rights. Late yesterday, a federal appeals court ruled that the FDA's original approval of mifepristone could stand until they hear the full case. It is concerning that the appeals court rolled back some of the provisions that had been made the product more accessible in the years past. So we're making more developments from that case. But we should be clear, a federal judge in the state of Washington essentially ruled in the favor of our state to preserve access to this product and continue the FDA approval. We will follow that ruling, and we expect the Federal Food and Drug Administration also to follow that ruling, which is the judge for the state of Washington. I've talked to our most excellent Attorney General Bob Ferguson about this. He will pursue this with the aggression that is appropriate. We look forward to success on that front. Now, here's the take-home message, though, that's very important. Regardless of what happens in this litigation regarding the Texas court decision, mifepristone will remain available to the women of the state of Washington. I want to repeat that. Regardless of what happens, whether or not this Texas decision is affirmed, this product will be legally available in the state of Washington for several reasons. Number one, we had the foresight to acquire it before this judge's outrageous decision. Second, our state law clearly gives Washington State the right to make our own decision about the propriety of this pharmaceutical. And it is our decision that a product that has been used safely for 20 years and effectively for 20 years ought to remain accessible. So we do not have to remain on tenterhooks regarding what happens to the Texas decision. We have a decision in the Washington State to continue to make this pharmaceutical available. Now, obviously, that litigation is still important because both we would like it resolved by the courts here in Washington, and we care about our brother and sister states as well. So I hope that that will be clear. Corrections is going to distribute that supply. We do need a technical bill to pass through the legislature. I'm confident it will get to my desk shortly. To make sure that we remove any technical objection to distribution of that product. There are other bills as well that are very important. I'm confident will get to my desk. Bills that protect patient data so that people's privacy rights are not violated through data mining. We want to have a bill that protects the rights of patients and providers, a shield law to prevent other states from using our judicial system to try to impose their will on Washington citizens. And we want to reduce financial burdens for those providing this form of health care. Now, we are leading the nation in this fight, and as the first state to have voted to preserve the right of a freedom of choice, we are comfortable in the role of leading the nation, and will continue to do so. Let me turn to where we are in the legislative session. With 2 weeks to go in the session, I'm very happy about the progress we're making. We're making progress on making more housing available by increasing the places where we can build. We're making progress on financing additional housing. We're making progress on making permitting of new housing more efficient. We're addressing climate change on multiple fronts. We're going to be moving historic gun legislation. We're advancing new ways of providing mental health and protecting the right of choice. This is shaping up to be an extremely productive session, and I appreciate everybody's hard work. But we're not done yet, obviously. We're extremely close to banning the sale of assault weapons. And obviously, I've been working on this for decades, so it's particularly gratifying, but ought to be gratifying to everybody in the state of Washington. The latest episode in Louisville should remind us of the necessity of this legislation. But we have other bills as well. I'm particularly pleased about the bill that will require safety training before people buy a firearm and implementing a 10-day waiting period to increase safety from gun violence in the state of Washington. That's something that has been shown to be very effective in reducing gun violence, and I hope that this will get to my desk. I believe it will. I want to thank Representative Berry, particularly for her leadership advancing this bill. We're going to take major steps this year in the effort against gun violence. I still think there's more work to be done on financing housing. We have a housing crisis. The homelessness crisis is a housing crisis. When we want people to get drug treatment, when we want them to get mental health treatment, they need to have some housing while they get that treatment. And we need to build more housing for working families in the state of Washington, so rents do not go through the roof. We know investments in housing, behavioral health, and other social services help put people in more stable living situations. But we simply have to meet this challenge of the inadequate housing in the state of Washington at the scale that is necessary to actually move the needle. I'm pleased that we have our middle housing bill moving through the legislature, which should free up some additional space in our cities to actually build more housing for people. I think that's an important step forward. I want to thank Representative Bateman for her amazing leadership and others for getting this job done. My office is also working with legislative leaders to ensure that we have a plan for delivering projects included in our transportation efforts. I'm working closely with committee chairs to develop a path forward in this regard. We have to face the reality of decreasing revenues, increased costs, and constraints on contractor availability. We have work to do to provide all Washingtonians transportation progress to achieve our goals. I have cautioned legislators about overpromising in this budget and failing to set necessary priorities with declining revenues and increasing costs. I've expressed my concerns about that to the chairs. So we all have further work to do in this regard. Some good news on the agency front. We've announced the appointment of Michael Fong as new director of the State Department of Commerce. He replaces Lisa Brown, who did tremendous work on housing and a host of other issues. Michael brings a really great portfolio of experience to this position, and he's going to be the right person to really deliver on the multiple efforts Commerce has in so many different areas. Eric Pettigrew is our new director of the State Lottery Commission. He's an accomplished former legislator and public servant, a long record of collaborating with others, a person of tremendous integrity, and within hours of our appointment, Eric Pettigrew delivered the Kraken into the playoff berth that we have been seeking. So congratulations, Eric, and go Kraken. With that, happy to stand for your questions.
Governor, House Bill 1533, that's the public records bill that exempts domestic violence survivors from having their public records be disclosed. There's been some controversy over this with news media outlets who say, it prevent them from getting records. So an exception was added to that for news media, but I'm curious if you have any concerns about state agencies being the ones to determine who is media and who isn't media to turn those records over.
Yeah, I think we're going to have agencies make their best decision on that. I do think the bill is heading in the right direction, is my general review. As you know, we've been very very transparent in our operations, maybe the most transparent in state history, so we value that. But I think for folks who have had a domestic violence situation, I'm comfortable with what we do now as an exception for media outlets. We hope that our agencies, to some degree, will have a somewhat broad-based definition of media in this regard. I think that'll work out.
And it's something you plan on signing, if it came to your desk today, is it something you would sign?
It'd be my intention. I haven't got the full briefing on that, but that would be my inclination at the moment.
Governor, two questions. You mentioned cautioning legislatures or legislators. Are you talking about the overall size of the budget, or particular? Is it concerned the 2-year or the 4-year outlook? And then, second question. I'm curious. It sounds like we're going to see a new version of the proposed REIT tax for housing in I think House Finance tomorrow. And it sounds like probably that's being favored in the legislature at this point more than the bond proposal. I'm just curious to get your sense on your feelings on a REIT tax. Would you favor it if that's passed forward?
Well, I have been very clear. We need to go big on housing. We need to have a housing investment, public investment that is necessary to eliminate this housing crisis. And I have expressed an openness to legislators about how to get there. I proposed one idea, which would be a bond. An alternative idea is a REIT. If there's some other idea, I'm open to ideas how we do this. But we ought to be insistent that we really go big at scale this year in public investment. And the reason is that even with the progress we've made to open up some land because of zoning issues, the private market is not going to be able to build as many houses as we need, particularly for those in the lower end of the spectrum. Not just for those who are chronically homeless, but for those who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and can't afford rent in Western Washington. So my take home is we need to go big on housing. I'm open to ideas, including the REIT. And so I'm going to stay tuned and watch what the legislators propose. But we need action for them. We need it this day, and we need it at scale.
Governor, given that it's 2023, do you have a new timeline or goal in mind for getting behavioral health facilities in local communities up and running?
Well, it's yesterday and 2 months before yesterday. It's something we've been trying to accelerate as much as humanly possible. So our goal is to make as much progress every single day as we can. We know we have mental care crisis. We need additional facilities, and we need additional personnel to be able to actually staff these facilities. So we are moving as fast as we can to develop multiple community-based systems. As you know, we've had some resistance from local communities that has slowed down that process. We have had some staffing shortage issues that have made this more difficult, but my direction to our agency, and I believe they've been doing this, is every single morning getting up and looking for alternatives to provide these facilities as fast as humanly possible. And I believe that they are doing that. It's not as fast as any of us would like, because we'd like to be having this done years ago. But I think we are turning over every rock, every lot where we can build a facility, every place we can recruit psychologists as fast as humanly possible. Washingtonians need that. I want to reiterate, though, that the mental health is very directly associated with this housing crisis. Because if you are going to have a person with a mental health challenge, they've got to have housing while you're treating it. So we need the legislature to produce on housing and mental health both if we're going to succeed. I know some folks that I've talked to have said, well, it's just a mental health challenge. If people who are living in these encampments right now would just deal with their mental health challenges, that's the real problem. It's not a housing shortage. The problem with that is you can't expect a person to deal with their untreated schizophrenia out underneath a blue tarp. You can't treat people under a blue tarp. And the same has to go with drug treatment. So this is very much, these two things are combined, and we're just trying to move as fast as humanly possible. There is one bill I think I look forward to that will give us new alternatives how we provide mental health care to those in the criminal justice system who are awaiting competency hearings and the like. It is my hope that we get some new flexible and more creative ways about how we provide them treatment. And I think that that's one thing that's going to help as well. So we'll keep working on it.
Blake, two different versions, Senate, House. Is there one that you prefer, gross misdemeanor versus a misdemeanor? Are you involved at all in negotiations with 10 days to go here in the session?
Well, I would be involved if the legislators think it would become helpful. I haven't been asked to intervene in those discussions yet. I do not express a preference. I do believe we should maintain some criminal sanction to encourage people to get into drug treatment. And I do believe we need to emphasize, in the first order, diversion to get those into treatment as fast as possible. Both of those approaches you've indicated will fulfill what I believe is required for the right approach.
Governor, you mentioned the assault weapons ban. That bill, have you asked them directly in the last couple days to say, get it to me now, as opposed to their process could drag on for 2, 3, 4 days, another week, longer?
I have not. I've been waiting on it since 1994, so I guess I can take a couple more days. I think they'll get it to me in all due time. But I want to reiterate, we've got 3 bills. I think the fact that all 3 are potentially getting to my desk, I'm thrilled by. I want to, again, particularly appreciate their effort on requiring safety training in a 10-day waiting period. This type of bill, frankly, has got less attention, but the evidence is it can be maybe the most effective thing to reduce gun violence, to get people actually to understand the risk that they have and their family has, not only from homicides, but from suicides, and to have a 10-day waiting period so people don't go out and just buy a gun and then go, create mass murder like has happened recently. So I'm really appreciative of that bill getting here.
Do you support a proposal in the legislature to raise the property tax cap from 1% to 3%?
I haven't expressed a position in that regard. So I don't have, at the moment, I have not expressed a position.
I know you wrote a letter to the chairs of the budget writers in all 3, operating, capital, transportation. The operating budget letter, you had seemed to be implying essentially that you thought the Senate budget was a little cheap. They were underfunding a lot of programs, human services and others, and you were supportive of the higher funding in the House budget. Has anything changed since you sent them that letter, and do you feel, can you elaborate on where you think the Senate budget underfunded?
Well, I'm particularly impressed that we need a higher level, as high a level as we can finance for housing this year. I think the House heads in that direction more than the Senate budget. As I've indicated, I think this is a matter of scale. You can't do this nickel and diming it. You can't do it on the cheap. This requires in the billion-dollar range to actually move the needle. And I proposed a way to do that to assure 6 years of investment of that scale. We would need some additional revenue source to make a 6-year commitment. So I understand the House is looking at a potential revenue source in that regard. That's one way to do this, to have a multi-year investment. I think that would be fantastic. Failing that, we should make a 1 biennium investment in the billion-dollar range. And I think that we desperately need that in the state of Washington. And the reason is that even with these density requirements, the private sector cannot finance housing for people who need it, including working people. They simply cannot finance it. It requires public investment. And that public investment can't be done at 10 cents on the dollar, or we're going to have permanent housing, homeless encampments in the state of Washington. Now, we're making progress on that. We've moved 500 people into housing off of our right-of-ways in the last several months. We continue to do so. We're closing camps as we did in Pasadena under I-5 in the Central District. That removal process is underway. So we're making progress, but you have to do it at scale, or this is going to be a chronic problem in the state of Washington. So that's what I'm looking forward to. The final budget will do that. And that's a combination of capital budget and operating budget. Both contributed.
Do you have any updates about the status of the police pursuit bill? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm pleased that there's progress being made. I'm pleased that both chambers are moving it. I support some reforms and improvement of the pursuit bills. We've learned since the original bill passed. I think we do need some reform of those to set that needle. This needle takes judgment where you set it. We're safe, we want safety both against criminals who commit crimes, and we want safety to not have people get injured during chases, and we need to set that needle. I think that needle needs to be adjusted. And I'm very pleased that both chambers are moving an adjustment to that to give law enforcement officers more ability to do pursuits. I'll look forward to its passage.
What do you think about the Senate bill that passed last night regarding the state not having to disclose a transgender or at-risk youth's location to that person's parents? Should the state be involved in that? Parents are saying that that's a parent's right, that they should know where their child is if they're endangered. Is that something you will support?
From what I know about it, yes, at the moment. I haven't had a full briefing on it. But the situation is, if a young person is totally estranged from their parents, has no meaningful relationship, we need someone to care for that child. And the way the legislation is set up is essentially the Department of Children, Youth, and Families will step into that position to care for that child. So you have somebody looking out for their benefit. Unfortunately, there is a reality in our state, and in many cases, kids are physically abused, mentally abused. Their parents sometimes have drug problems. They have abandoned their young people, and there's no, in some sense, real parent there. Under those circumstances, we need somebody to care for the child, and this basically would require notification to go to the department who would step into the shoes of the parent and try to protect that child as appropriate. I wish we lived in a world where it's all Ozzie and Harriet, and there's two parents sitting there and they come home at night and one says, "I'm home, Jane," or whatever. Actually, that wasn't the golden years. There were a lot of problems with the 50s in many, many ways. But we have to face the reality that that's not the situation for many of these homeless kids. Otherwise, they're going to be out in the street. Anything else?
Not every child in that situation is, they may just run away. I mean, the bill covers folks who just run away. Is that enough? If you run away from home and you say, I don't get along with my parents, my lifestyle is one that they disagree with, is that enough for the state to step in and prevent notification?
We believe it is better to have a young person in a shelter with some adult supervision than having them out living on the streets, maybe being trafficked, sexually trafficked, maybe being exposed to drug treatment. We think it is better to have them in some contained and controlled environment, and that's what we're talking about, because if you insist on notification in some instances, that kid is not going to stay. They're going to be going out on the streets, talking to child traffickers and every other horrendous thing you can imagine. So in the real world, we want these kids to be protected and not homeless, and that's basically the reason for this bill. Anything else? With that, go Kraken. Thank you.